We've seen it, we've had a good poke around inside. You have even voted it the car you're most excited about arriving in 2024. And now today, for the first time, we are getting behind the wheel of the brand new Renault 5. In this video, I'll tell you everything you need to know about possibly the most important new car launch of this year, and I'll even be finding out how efficient it is in real-world driving. So stay watching, and don't forget to subscribe for lots more new car reviews, reveals, and road trips. Now, I'm not going to spend ages talking about the styling because there are already a million YouTube videos about that. This was first revealed as a concept way back in 2021, and fairly obviously, it is a modern interpretation of the original Renault 5. The most obvious design cues are these vertical taillights here in the rear pillars, and this little kick at the bottom here is actually a nod to the wide body of the original 5 Turbo. The original 5 back in the 70s was a 3-door car, but 3-door cars aren't very popular these days, so Renault has fitted rear doors to this new model, but the handles for them are hidden up here. So that just helps the car look a little less frumpy and a little more sporty, which is a good thing. Anyway, if you're curious what this funny detail here is on the bonnet, well, it's in roughly the same place as a vent on the original Renault 5. It doesn't serve that purpose here, of course, but it isn't just a piece of plastic with a 5 written on it. It is in fact a charge level indicator if you go for Techno trim or Iconic trim. So what happens is when you plug the car in, these lights illuminate to give you a rough idea of the level of the battery, so you don't have to get into the car and check the percentage on the instruments. Round at the nose, and perhaps surprisingly, there are not square headlights on this car. The original 5 and the second generation car from the 1980s, of course, both had rectangular headlights, but there is, as you can probably see, a rectangle at the back of the lens there, and there is also another one down here, which is the daytime running lights of the car, and that is in the same position as the fog lights on the original 5 Turbo. But while it might look similar, this is a much larger car than the Renault 5s of the 70s and 80s. To give you some idea of the difference, the original 5 from 1972 was around about 3.5 metres long. This is more than 3.9 metres long. Although by modern standards, it's not actually that big. This is actually slightly smaller than the Renault Zoe, which it effectively replaces. So it's a little bit bigger than the new Mini Cooper electric, and a little bit smaller than a Peugeot E208. Now, if you're thinking this is probably just a Renault Zoe with a funky looking body plonked on top, well, that isn't the case at all. The new 5 is actually the first car on Renault's new Ampere electric car underpinnings, which will also be used on the Renault 4, the Renault Twingo, and the next Nissan Micra as well. And it's designed to offer cheaper production costs, which is obviously great news for Renault, but also allow improved efficiency, which means in theory, cheaper electricity bills for you. As I said earlier, we'll get a better idea of the new 5's real world efficiency and range a bit later on. But what about the official numbers? Well, it depends which version you go for, because there are 2 batteries. There's a 40 kilowatt hour version and a 52 kilowatt hour option. This car has the large battery, and on paper, it can do up to 248 miles on the charge, which isn't amazing by modern EV standards. Even an entry-level Tesla Model 3, for example, can go way further on a charge. But importantly, it is better than any Fiat 500, and it's around about the same range that's offered by the latest Mini Cooper SE. If you go for the cheaper 40 kilowatt hour battery, then that range drops to 186 miles, and that's not terrible, but it will certainly make longer trips a bit more of a challenge. And it isn't only the range of the 40 kilowatt hour that might frustrate you on longer journeys, because it can accept a maximum of 80 kilowatts of charging power. That means you'll be waiting more than half an hour for a 10 to 80% top up, even in ideal conditions. Now, that wait time is about the same on this 52 kilowatt hour version, but remember, you're filling a bigger battery, so you're adding miles at a faster rate. This version can accept a peak charging power of 100 kilowatts, which isn't amazing by modern EV standards, so clearly the Renault 5 isn't aimed at drivers who need to tear up and down the country regularly, but it's about the same charging speed as you'll get in a Peugeot E208 or a Mini Cooper SE. An even cheaper version is on the way that doesn't have a CCS fast charging point at all. So the only way to charge that up is by plugging it in at home. However, at the moment, Renault doesn't plan to offer that in the UK. The 5 is also the first Renault with vehicle-to-load capability, and that means if I plug this adapter into the charging socket, I can use the car to power appliances, perhaps a Hoover or even an electric barbecue. This car also has vehicle-to-grid capability. That means not only can it pull power from the grid to charge up the battery, it can also feed it back into the grid, which could potentially earn you some money and also gives you access to some of the latest and most attractive energy tariffs. Anyway, let's talk about personalisation, because as with other small retro cars like the Fiat 500 and the Mini, that's a key reason you might choose one of these over something more conservative, say an MG4 or a Peugeot E208. And we should probably start with colour, because with a lot of modern cars, you get very safe colour palettes to choose from with lots of silvers and greys. But that isn't the case here, as you've probably guessed. Now, this colour is called Pop Green, and believe it or not, it's the only standard paint colour that you don't have to pay extra for. It's not even a flat colour either, it's actually slightly metallic. There is an equally bright Pop Yellow, but don't worry, if you don't want anything quite so lurid, then you can have a metallic black, a metallic navy blue, and there's a white as well. And you can, if you go for Techno or Iconic trim, have a black roof for a two-tone effect. This strip here, as you can see on this car, it is red, but you can also have it in gold or black. All versions come with 18-inch alloys, and if you go for range-topping Iconic trim in the UK, then you will get this chrono design here. Each of these spokes is supposed to represent an hour marker on a watch, and there's also a little 5 down there on one of the spokes. If you go for entry-level Evolution or Techno trim, then you'll get a slightly different design, which actually featured on the 2021 concept car. There are no fewer than 104 different accessories for the new Renault 5, 33 of which are so-called iconic accessories. And that means, and I'm reading from the press release here, that they showcase or enhance the car's design, whatever that means. So out here, for example, you can have these 5 decals on the door, and you can have them on the roof. And in here, there are even more ways to personalise your Renault 5, thanks to 3D printing technology, because you can add various clip-on features and extra storage compartments as well. Something Renault is particularly proud of is this changeable tip for the gear selector up there. You can swap that out very easily for a different colour just to suit your own personal tastes or to match the colour of the car. And Renault says this is the first car that has been designed specifically to carry baguettes, because you can get a clip-on basket for the centre console down here. And that means you don't have to worry about your baguette getting crushed with a load of other shopping in the boot, or the upholstery here getting flour and crumbs all over it if you throw that baguette onto the front seats there. Probably something that's a little bit more useful to French buyers, but it's a nice touch nonetheless. Anyway, what about the rest of the interior? Because this steering wheel here looks very similar to the one that you'll find in the latest Megane, so not really retro at all. And to be honest, I do find that if I put it exactly where I want it, it does block some of my view of the display behind. So I need to just shift that up a little bit. But it's not a huge problem, because even in this position, then I am still fairly comfortable. This screen behind is 7 inches if you go for entry-level Evolution trim, or 10.1 inches if you go for Iconic or Techno trim. That's what you can see here. And this other screen next to it is for the infotainment system, of course. Now that measures 10 inches, whichever trim level you go for. But if you go for entry-level Evolution trim, then you don't get the Google-based navigation system that you see on this car. And that is actually one of the best native navigation systems we've tried, because it is basically the same as Google Maps on your phone. It's really easy to use, and it's very good at navigating you around traffic. You also get a Google-based voice control system, again, one of the best out there, because it's really good at recognizing what you're trying to tell it, which isn't always the case with the voice control systems in a lot of modern cars. But don't worry, you don't have to use the native navigation system if you don't want to. You can, of course, sync up your mobile phone and use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto smartphone mirroring. And top marks to Renault for having some physical air conditioning controls. Of course, in a lot of modern cars, particularly in this price range, you'll find that these controls are put into the touchscreen up here, which means they're very fiddly to use, particularly when you're driving. But if I want to adjust the temperature when I'm driving along here, then all I do is just nudge that switch up or down. Very simple, very easy to do while driving. They do feel a little bit cheap perhaps, and there are also plenty of other hard plastics in here on top of the dashboard, on the centre console here, and on the top of the door. But you also get some much nicer materials in here, on the seats for example. Now these seats, if you go for range topping Iconic trim, the pattern in them is very similar to what featured in the original Renault 5 Turbo. That's not the case here. This is a mid-spec techno model, and you get denim upholstery, or what Renault calls denim anyway. It's not actually denim because denim is made from cotton, and this is made from 100% recycled bottles, which is very worthy. And if you're worried that probably means it feels quite cheap and plasticky, it doesn't at all. It's actually quite nice. And you also get that up here on the dashboard and on the insides of the doors. You are also pretty well catered for when it comes to storage, because you have a nice deep, albeit fairly narrow, compartment under the central armrest. There is another tray just in front of it which has a partition in it, so you can turn it into a double cup holder very easily. And then there's a tray a little bit further forward, and that has a wireless charging pad at the bottom if you go for iconic or techno trim. There is also a smaller tray up here which is useful for throwing some coins or some chewing gum. And although these door bins here, they're fairly shallow, they are at least quite long, so you can fit lots of smaller items in there. So overall, particularly given the rivals that the new Renault 5 is up against, it has a pretty nice interior. So good in the front, not so good in the back, as you can probably see. So admittedly, I am just over 6 foot tall, and this seat in front is set up for my driving position, but my knees are absolutely wedged against the back of the front seat there, and also foot space is absolutely terrible. Not only because of how low this seat is to the ground, so my toes are wedged against the floor, but also because of how narrow the gap is between the back of the front seats and this bulkhead. And that not only makes it quite uncomfortable when you're sitting here, it also makes it pretty difficult to get in and out. More positively though, you do get a good view out. You've got quite a nice sized window here at the side, and headroom isn't terrible. It's certainly better than in a Mini or a Fiat 500, although if I do sit back in my seat and try to use this head restraint behind me, well, to be honest, it may as well not be there, because my head just hits the roof lining. Talking of the roof lining though, it has a pattern on it that is inspired by the one on the roof lining of the original Renault 5. More positive news as well when it comes to carrying children, because the new Renault 5 has 3 ISOFIX mounting points, one on each of these outer seats in the back, and there's also another one on the front passenger seat. So if you mainly need to carry kids about, or perhaps shorter adults on occasional journeys, then this car will do the job absolutely fine. But if you often find yourself carrying tall people in the back, then you might want to have a look at a bigger car like the MG4. Now, Renault says this car has a 326 litre boot, which is very big for such a small car. It is a bit misleading though, because it is the volume if you were to literally pour water into this load bay. And of course, most luggage doesn't come in liquid form. A far more representative figure is the VDA figure, and that is obtained by loading lots of small blocks into the boot and counting up how many fit. That figure is available for the Renault 5, you just have to go digging for it in small print, and it is 277 litres. That's not bad, it's not as big as the boot in a Peugeot E208, but it is quite a bit bigger than the one in an electric Fiat 500 or the new electric Mini. There is quite an annoying load lip at the entrance here. It's huge, as you can see, and you have to lug things over that and back out again when you're unloading. On the plus side though, there is some underfloor storage for the charging cables, which is handy because the Renault 5 does not have any storage under the bonnet. Right, I am finally driving the new Renault 5, and the plan is to head from Nice city centre, which is where I am now, to Monaco, and from there I'll head up into the hills for some twistier roads to a place called Grasse, and that will give us a chance to drive this car in different environments, but also find out how efficient it is both in town and out on the open road. Now, the battery is charged to 100%. The car is telling me I have 410 kilometers of remaining range left, and later on I'll tell you how efficient this car has been throughout the journey. We have made it to Monaco, and this car is getting a huge amount of attention actually. You've got Lamborghinis and Ferraris rolling around here, but I'd say more people are looking at this. We're getting quite a few thumbs up. But what's this car actually like to drive in this sort of urban environment? Well, on the whole, it's actually very good. You've got nice light controls, really tight turning circle as well actually of just 10.3 meters. And the brakes, they also deserve a special mention because this car has a brake-by-wire system, so there's no mechanical link between the brake pedal and the braking system. And Renault says it's done that to make the brakes smoother and more predictable, because in a lot of electric cars, the regenerative braking system means that it can be quite difficult to slow down smoothly. The brakes can be quite grabby and quite jerky, particularly in other Renault EVs actually, including the Zoe, which is no longer on sale of course, and the Megane. And this is a big improvement because it's easy to judge how much pressure you have to put on the brake pedal to slow down smoothly, and that's the most important thing. It's not the best braking system around because you don't get a huge amount of feel through the pedal, but certainly for Renault, it is a big, big improvement. One thing you will have to get used to though, if you buy a Renault 5, is the fact that there is no park on the gear selector. So you've got a drive, you've got a neutral, you've got a reverse, but there is no park to lock the electric motor when you're stopped. So what you have to do is you have to put the car in neutral and then pull the electric parking brake on, or you have to switch the car off. So that is a little bit annoying, to be honest, especially when Renault's other EVs, including the Megane and the Scenic, have a park as standard. But is the new 5 as fun to drive as Renault says it is? Well, to be honest, it doesn't feel particularly sporty in the way that it's set up. There is a reasonable amount of body lean along these mountain roads we're driving along at the moment. The front end isn't particularly sharp and the steering is fairly slow off centre, even though, as I said earlier, this car does have quite a tight turning circle. So it doesn't feel as agile and it doesn't feel as fun, I would say, as the new Mini Cooper electric. But what it does do really well is comfort and refinement. This is certainly one of the best riding small electric cars that we've tried. And also, even at motorway speeds, it's surprisingly quiet. There's very little in the way of wind or road noise. So the only sound you are aware of as you drive at higher speeds is a whine from the electric motor. That is there in the background, particularly when you ease off and on the accelerator pedal. At the moment in the UK, there are two different power outputs available. So there's a 119 brake horsepower electric motor, and there's also a 148 brake horsepower motor, which is fitted to this car. And acceleration in this particular Renault 5 is actually quite good. It can do 0 to 62 in 8 seconds. So it's way faster than a Fiat 500e or a Peugeot E208, and not that much slower than the fastest version of the new Mini Cooper electric. So overall, I would say that this car isn't necessarily huge fun to drive. There is an Alpine version on the way, don't forget, but it is very pleasant to drive. So particularly if you value comfort and refinement over agile handling, then this is one of the best small electric cars out there. So there are just two more things we need to talk about. The first is efficiency. So this car, on our first leg of the trip, from Nice to Monaco, we took a scenic route, so mostly urban and suburban driving. It averaged, according to the trip computer, at least 4.9 miles per kilowatt hour, which is really, really impressive. And even for the total 75-mile trip, which included some fast motorway driving and also some more, should we say, spirited driving up in the hills, this still averaged a really impressive 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour. So, assuming those figures are correct, this is a really efficient electric car, and all versions sold in the UK come with a heat pump as standard to help make them more efficient in cooler weather. The second, and arguably even more important thing, is price. This is a small budget electric car, of course, and although exact UK prices haven't been announced yet, we are pretty confident this is going to start around £23,000. And even the most expensive version of this car, that's the range-topping Iconic trim, with the more powerful electric motor and the larger 52 kilowatt hour battery, will only cost £29,000. Or to put it another way, the most expensive version of the new Renault 5 is likely to be cheaper than the cheapest version of the new Mini Cooper electric, which is quite something, particularly when you factor in that this car is good to drive, has a really smart interior, and because of its amazing desirability, it should hold on to its value really well. So overall, this has to go down as a fantastic small electric car. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to watch another one, click up there. And for our full detailed written review of the new Renault 5, click there.